Hello, I'm Lee Peterson. I'm the host of the podcast WDcast, which is called WDcast because it's brought to you by WD Partners, whose tagline is innovation at scale. And that means that they have services that go from strategy and insights, design, architecture and engineering, all the way to construction management. So end-to-end services. They're at WDPartners.com. So thank you very much, WD Partners, and thank you, Chris, in particular. And just a quick word on the mission of the show. We're always looking to talk to interesting people about the burning platforms of today. And, you know, given what's happened here in the last 6 or 7 months, it seems like everything's on fire in one way or another. Either you've got rocket fuel and you're going forward like never before, or you're going the other way down in flames. And so that's why I believe that our guest today is going to be super interesting. Her background is incredible, which we'll get into in a second. But I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Nita Rollins, who is the Chief Content Officer of a company called Stylograph right now. And they are an organic content marketing organization, which is so crucial in these days. And I'm sure Nita is a big part of that. Hello, Nita. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Super appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much. And I have to say, looking at your resume, that's probably one of the most interesting resumes in the world. And starting with a doctorate in critical thinking, which I had to critically think about what that was about. But if you wouldn't mind, could you give us a little bit of a background and share what you've got going on?
Well, I was born in Cincinnati in a hospital where my mother was a dietitian, and as a result of that, I cost 4 cents. I cost millions after that. I cost 4 cents in the hospital, but that's a hospital. I went to Ohio Wesleyan for my undergrad ed because my father was a professor there, professor of modern British literature and Irish drama. Wow. And yes, and that took me to Trinity College. I know that you were curious about that. That is Trinity College in Dublin, Ireland. Yes, the Emerald Isle. He taught at Trinity for about 20 years. It was a big program. Yes. And that was thrilling. So after Ohio Wesleyan, I went to Ohio State because they had a fabulous photography and cinema department, which has since been disbanded. It was during a period where neo-Marxists were very influential in academia, and it caused a rift in the department. And I don't remember experiencing any of it personally. I had a wonderful master's experience, in film theory experience at Ohio State. From Ohio State, I was one of 4 out of 2,000 applicants to the PhD program in critical studies at UCLA. And one of my colleagues was also from Ohio State. She had also gone to Ohio State in photography and cinema. So not a bad showing for OSU at UCLA. That was a phenomenal program. It's the best in the country as far as I'm concerned. It also had the added appeal or allure of Los Angeles itself and its proximity to Hollywood and screenwriters. I mean, I had screenwriters in the front row of my class. So MFA students would have to take certain film history, film criticism, film theory courses to earn their MFA. And so there was this electricity, this energy that comes from people who have completely different objectives. And will approach, film as a practitioner, for instance, and not as a historian. Those conversations made for some of the most interesting I had when I was a teaching fellow at UCLA.
But a PhD in critical thinking, right?
Well, it's critical studies.
Critical studies.
Yes. What you take with you is critical thinking, absolutely, which is in short supply these days.
Could you give us a little synopsis of critical studies? Like what?
Critical studies, I think what they were trying to signal with the department's decision to go with critical studies was that it was inspired by and would draw from the philosophical teachings of critical theory. Critical studies is a fascinating, energizing blend of social theory, social sciences, and philosophy, if you will, with the objective of critiquing the political economy, all of the things that that sort of structure our human existence, but with the purposes of furthering the flourishing of humankind. In other words, making people freer as a result of their fully understanding the sources of their belief system, if you will. So that was enormously invaluable for me when I moved into marketing, because I could see that there was a blind spot in the marketing toolkit that I could readily address as a result of my critical studies background. Mm. You're constantly questioning how someone comes to believe what they believe, prefer what they prefer. If you're constantly questioning the genesis, the validity of a belief system, then you have some distance from it that consumers themselves don't always have. And so the through line for me was not readily apparent. It took a while to get there, of course. I had no intention of going into marketing.
So how do you get from this to, especially LA? Like,
right.
I always thought, like, if I would have gone to LA when I was 19 or 20 years old, I never would have come home. I never would have come back to the Midwest. But
right.
How do you get to Columbus, Ohio?
Right. Well, I'm the daughter of a Greek mother, and that had an enormous bearing on where I decided to live. I chose not to live far away from my mother, and she's my best friend, and I decided to live closer to my mother. So I was dissertating. I was finishing the dissertation in Columbus, and the philosophical concepts that I was wrestling with, and the books that I was reading were only made possible by the lack of distractions that you can achieve in a Midwestern town that are not as easily achieved on the West Coast.
Okay, got it.
So that sounds.
LA can be a little distracting, and New York as well.
LA is extremely seductive. Once I settled here, I moved into journalism and loved it, of course. Anything that has to do with research of one sort or another, and ideas and words, and it was a romp. It was a wedding and travel magazine. There were two of them in Cincinnati and Columbus, and they were acquired by Columbus Monthly later, but I had full editorial discretion, really, as long as I did due diligence by all the vendors who were represented in the magazine. As long as I was interviewing photographers, event coordinators, makeup artists, caterers, I could write about whatever I wanted to write about. So I was constantly sneaking cinematic subjects into the magazine. If I was teaching them about the trousseau, the history of the trousseau, I would have to make reference to Grace Kelly in Hitchcock's Rear Window, because she has this little compact overnighter bag. She's trying to demonstrate that she can live the rough and rugged life of a photojournalist. Are you familiar with the movie?
Oh yeah.
Window? Yes.
Oh
right.
Yeah. I think I've seen
and
it.
It pops open and out springs a chiffon. Well, you recall the scene. It's unforgettable. And so I was constantly sneaking cinematic material into the editorial. Found a lot of pleasure in doing so.
Now, there's just a personal question at this point, because we're going to talk about. I mean, you had a career with Resource, and I want to talk about Stylograph as well. But at this point in time in your career, not this point in time, but at that point in time in your career, it seems to me like the world could use you. You know what I mean? And so I think that you probably had to make some kind of choice in roads, like, should I help the greater good or the commercial good?
Oh,
was that a conscious choice as you chose commercialism? Because I think critical thinking, as you described it, is so needed now by so many people. It's almost a state of educating people about what they're learning and believing what they're learning. And now, if you think about what's happening, I mean, we've got about a third of the population that is believing just about anything. So like a service like critical thinking, like for the greater good of man, would have been something that you could have aspired to, it feels like.
Well, that's very generous of you to say, and that debate still rages within me. That's not solved. Those are still, antipodal forces in my character. That will never be fully resolved. My natural inclinations and interests are not commercially accessible for the most part, and so the question becomes, what kind of podium? There are two questions. Well, there are probably several, but there are two. What kind of podium can you assume or develop to achieve the most impact through your points of view? And how much of critiquing and observing culture matters if you never enter the fray? The first is more of a question of economics, really.
Yeah, that's true.
It is. But the second is question of whether I think criticism of any sort is vital. I had even had professors who would say, "What do you mean you want to be a film critic? What is the point?" And I'd say, "How much time do you have?" Because I think I need to go sit in the professor's seat, and you need to sit in mine, because the fact that you're asking that question is shocking to me. But I really had one professor in particular who didn't understand criticism, didn't understand theory, because didn't understand the value of either, because he was the archivist.
Yeah.
All right. So, just completely different value system and philosophical orientation. But for me, being a critic and being a curator should be two streams that merge from time to time, to stay fair to the profession. I think to stay really truly in touch with the profession, it helps sometimes to live as a practitioner and to experience the challenges of the medium or the art form, right? Even if you don't do that, though, I think criticism, my philosophy of criticism is that is different from, I was just reading about the departure after 27 years of Ben Brantley, the New York Times drama critic.
Yeah.
And when he started, oh gosh, he has a fascinating background, which you would really enjoy, Lee, because he wrote for Women's Wear Daily.
Right.
Before he was a drama critic. And I forget, Calvin Klein quipped once at a party that he used to have a real clout when he was the fashion critic for Women's Wear Daily. Now he writes for that rag, the New York Times. He was instructed by one of his colleagues to make sure that he was clear about whether he liked the film or not. Always be clear about that. In other words, turn criticism into, I can't believe I'm disparaging his work, and I'm not. But I just think criticism plays a different role. I don't think criticism should be consumer reports. I don't think that's the role of criticism. I think film criticism, art criticism has a completely different mission, for me at any rate, and that is to provide avenues into experiential avenues, ideological, philosophical, psychological, sociological, whatever, floats your boat, avenues into the work of art. Not just for pleasure, not just to enhance pleasure, but to fully engage with the artwork on its terms, so that you come away having felt that you had an experience, not, and I had an experience there. Something happened. I feel somewhat transformed. I feel that I saw something that I had never glimpsed before. And critics can do that. They can make it possible for more people who have had no arts education whatsoever, or they didn't study film in school, or whatever the case may be. They now feel they're enriched somehow.
Well, yeah. What's interesting about that is my daughter went to the Art Institute of Chicago, which I was just talking about, now Parsons. some of her work is back up there. But whenever they would create anything as part of their classes, they'd sit down and do a crit. And so like critiquing is a part of every artist's background, unless of course you come from the street like Basquiat or somebody like that, and you just make something that everybody absolutely loves. But even then, then the New York Times is criticizing you, right? Or
well,
somebody.
That's right.
I've also had experiences with art, and because it's different that any medium. You hear music as art, and everybody can say, I love that song. I love that part of that song and all that. I had that experience with a painting once. It was a Renoir, and I was in the Art Institute, and I looked at it, and I thought, oh my God, I love it. I loved it.
Right.
Love.
Right.
Like you would for a human or, for a song that you like or anything like that. That was the first time I had that, but that was a little bit of an epiphany too. It just hit me. And then you understand why somebody could spend like $25 billion on a Picasso or something. They must have loved it.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. You flatter the art collector probably a bit there, but yes, I mean, one would hope that it's not just for its investment value, that people actually are in that position to buy it because it moves them. I mean, otherwise, it's not really functioning as art, is it, at all? Right?
It moves somebody. I mean, that's for sure. Sometimes you hear a pop song and you think, oh my God, I hate that. But it's moving a lot of people. There wouldn't be a pop song. Okay, so let's talk about Stylograph.
Okay.
Because I know my background with you was Resource and Fitch, I believe, too.
Yeah.
I've always heard about the person behind the curtain there, as we were talking about before, Dr. Nita Rollins. But Stylograph I'm not familiar with. So you could tell us a little bit about that?
It's my own company, and it's a fledgling company. It's a new chapter company for me. I didn't want to depart from the Nita that the world knows. That's a very difficult change to effect. But I wanted to circle back to some passions of mine that had languished a bit. Again, because of what we just spoke of earlier. If you have interests that don't immediately say that's really commercially viable, then you have to figure that out, don't you?
Yeah.
And if you love philosophy like I do, you have to go in search of an audience. You have to make an audience. You have to create your own podium sometimes. Yeah, I mean, there's academia, but that's adjunct utopia currently. It's very, very degraded environment. I'm going to go head to head with Scott Galloway on this because he's anti-tenure and he thinks it's overpriced. And
yeah,
that's the topic.
I saw one of his latest things on that. Actually.
Yeah. For me, I want to be able to do what I do best for clients who recognize the value of critical importance of understanding that brands are publishers today. All brands are publishers. The most exciting brands, the brands that are culturally credible, relevant, that have energy around them, enough energy to attract new consumers and retain current ones.
What do you think of that?
They understand.
What do you think of that brand Supreme? Speaking of that,
I get it. I'm not going to stand in line for a drop, if you will. But I think if I were in my 20s, I probably would. I'm very susceptible to those kinds of cultural sort of nerve centers, where something is happening and people are struggling to try to describe it adequately. They know there's a confluence or a kind of a collision between culture and fashion that's new. They know that luxury is collided with street in a way that's new, and they want to be a part of it somehow, even if it means only being a part as a consumer, which unfortunately is all too often the role that we are cast in to be a part of that energy. But I went to the Vogue pop-up that Louis Vuitton did to celebrate their incredible history of stylish travel and appropriate luggage. ridiculous luggage even sometimes, just insane. Entire bookcases, that you could take with you on safari, for instance. It was fabulous. It was in the original stock market space in New York City. Just incredible, just impeccable.
Wow.
And I thought about Supreme because there was quite a bit of it on display. That's one of my favorite luxury brands. Yeah, in large part because they refuse to sort of wait for culture to create an opening for them. That they insinuate, the brand insinuates itself into these liminal spaces, if you will, where graffiti and Louis Vuitton luggage might collide to create a new sensation, a new value proposition. So I dig it. I like it.
I think that they also have, like, as you were talking about, like brands as publishers, but one of the things that Supreme does in terms of publishing to me is almost like a sense of irreverence. They'll publish interviews, they'll publish information. Like I heard they did a red chest, and on top of the red chest, the tag was, because they thought, like, well, let's just make a red chest. That's pretty cool. And then they put a sign on it. Basically, their publishing was, if you're stupid enough to buy this, then you're stupid enough to give us $600. And they sold them out.
Yes, right. Everybody wants to be a part of the in joke. They want to be in the in crowd, Yes. Yeah, it's provocative. It's provocative in the right ways, I think, as far as it goes, right? As far as it goes, they still want you to buy the luggage. But it's a self-reflexive gesture. There's actually not something you see that often. When someone says, "Hi, I'm a luggage purveyor," or I'm a luxury brand, but I'm also aware that luxury is a strange proposition these days, and I'm going to keep reminding you of that. We're all in the know here, Yeah,
and I think too that there's a certain immorality too about the way they do it, because their basic premise and what they say, which is why I keep talking about them, is like, I don't care. Take it or leave it. This is what you got. Today you got a red chest. Tomorrow you got a red sweater. So it'll be something else. Like I've heard about toothpaste, like Supreme toothpaste and stuff like that. And you have to think, well, is that the modern expression of a brand now? And the way that a brand publishes is like, either you like this or you don't, and I don't really care.
That's a great question. I think to point out the fact that ours is a consumer culture, and that we're overrun with, and we produce too many goods, that we've commodified in some ways our own existence, is an unavoidable truth. And I think we know it. We had I would say this as a boomer who straddles the before times and the pre-digital and after. Yeah. When I co-wrote the Open brand, where Facebook all of a sudden was a facet of life, but I'm old enough to remember when it wasn't. Right. And so when someone says, yes, it's a consumer culture, you and I can achieve some distance from that, because I remember a time when my family vacations were relatively private affairs and weren't the stuff of Instagram feeds. There was no fear of missing out. We just piled into the station wagon and off we went. And those are formative experiences for our generation. But imagine being a Gen Zer where you don't have any recollection of pre-digital. You have none. And so, yes, I think when they struggle with this sense that it's all consumer culture, they never experienced the outside of that. They never got out of it. No one is ever completely liberated from it. But we had some feeling that it had its place and that we could escape it from time to time. And I don't think they feel that anymore.
We call them digital natives and digital immigrants, and you and I are immigrants.
Right.
And so we know what the old country was like. And, like when some of the norms were there, what, grown food actually tasted like, and not a lot of the stuff that you can buy now, like big agra. And you wanted to talk about sustainable fashion too, right? Along those same lines?
Yes, I mean the Stylograph is a content consultancy, but it's also a blog. Again, I'm trying to practice what I preach. So if you create content, you need to keep creating content. In as much as it's my own entity, I can write about what I want to write about. And at the time I was thinking about Stylograph, I very much wanted to use style and fashion as a kind of Trojan horse, if you will, into some of the less accessible topics that I'm drawn to, and I absolutely see a way to do that. I absolutely think you can talk about, and there is a space in the market that's begging for thought leadership, and that is the space that has those who live in the world of artifice and fashion, and those who are increasingly concerned about the natural world. You see, these are not. This is the principal tension of Stylograph for me, at least as I sit down to write. I want to write about Virgil Abloh and his work for Louis Vuitton, the cloud motif of his menswear line. But I also want to write about cloud spotting during the pandemic, because I want to write about nature, and I want to write about its opposite in many ways, which is the artificial world of high fashion and symbolism and signs, semiotics, which I'm also attracted to. Those are not natural, unholy alliances that I'm trying to bring together. So when you ask in your notes before the podcast, can you talk about sustainable fashion with a straight face? The answer is yes. Yes, you can. Yes, we need to. Yes, you can. Not enough. I mean, I have been reading about what happened to various sustainability initiatives, of course, during the pandemic, and they're costly and have been halted temporarily. So
I think sometimes too for me, because I worked for the Limited when it was the Limited, and we fancied ourselves as fashionistas, although to a degree of Louis Vuitton, it was a totally different world that we were doing, because we were commercial fashion, for sure.
Right.
But I always found a real conflict with that. But also, the more the natural things happen, the less you seem to be concerned about fashion. Like I noticed during the pandemic, after a couple of months, and I get Women's Wear Daily, and I was looking, I go, this all just looks absurd, like ridiculous. When I'm thinking about, oh my God, I pick up a virus from a package on the porch or something, like whatever we were struck with in April and May. And so all these clothes and these crazy fashion shows in Milan don't seem to make any sense. Conversely, when we have less of the natural things in our lives, whatever that might be, then the fashion seems to me make more sense, and you almost kind of need it to pick yourself up or to look better.
You probably thought about that more than most. That's very interesting, and I generally agree. But I think the rapprochement needs to be encouraged by thinkers and writers. I think in the same space we need to talk about nature and fashion, or nature and style, and you have to figure out how to do that. That's what I mean when I say I don't want to just critique. I want to try to create. I've tackled that a variety of ways. I'm working on a blog post now called Getting Arboreal. It's about how little we know about the impact fashion has on trees. Now, we know about palm oil in trees and orangutans. We know about the rainforest, because it's so difficult to talk about fashion in a way that feels good. If you're going to spend a lot on fashion, you want to feel good about life and yourself, and knowing that the collateral damage that your style has caused is not something you really want to talk about in the same breath. But nevertheless, I think that space is begging for more attention, because I think it can be done. I'm working my way through that. I think when I wrote about cloud culture, I wanted to talk about the feeling of being more observant of nature, of spending more time in nature, more than I have during my entire professional career, Lee, as a result of the pandemic, and how that had changed me. I wondered if my newfound love affair with clouds could be found. That sensation could be found in fashion. And of course, I found it. I found it not just figuratively, I found it literally. There's a famous designer for Comme des Garçons that sent models down the runway with giant tulle cumulus cloud constructs that added up to, a dress. At least that's what we're going to call it, because we lack another term. Right.
Kind of a dress.
Yes. And I can't tell you how thrilling that was to have that come together for me. It will never come together that neatly again. I'm sure that was beginner's luck, but to be able to wed the experience of Mother Nature, the stresses that we're putting on it with, stylistic trends is a very interesting.
Yeah, I think so too. Being out in LA, did you ever go out to Joshua Tree?
Sure, of course. It's a rite of passage, isn't it?
That's right, yeah.
Yes.
I think Jim Morrison started it, and then we all followed.
We've been making pilgrimages ever since. That's right. Right. Yes.
And I think part of that has to do with, and there's a correlation, because I had sort of a spiritual experience there. Everybody kind of does, because you look out and there's just nothing, for 60 miles until the next little ridge or mountain base and that type of thing. And you drive through and it's mystical in a way. And there's parts of fashion, and when fashion is really working, has the same sort of effect on you. And so to tie them together, and a lot of times, I remember when I was in the fashion business, I went to Nantucket one time and I saw this color palette, like the light blue of the sky and the green of the grass and the sand color, and then that kind of gray of the ocean and everything. And I thought, now there is a color card, and went back and made a color card and kind of tied those things together.
There you go.
But those are just, it gave me the colors to kind of create that palette.
Absolutely.
But I never thought of the two together, kind of, other than the fact that it gave it to me. I sort of stole it. I felt like.
Oh, I don't. You didn't steal it. You were an antenna for inspiration. You had to be professionally. I'm sure you are as a human being as well. You want to be receptive to things, and I think being inspired by beautiful natural scenery goes back to the dawn of humankind. So I think that to the extent that we're working from home and not confined, not all of us, but a few lucky folks, we're not in cubicles anymore, has reintroduced nature. In a way that has really taken me quite by surprise. I read Stella McCartney, who's one of the most sustainable luxury designers ever. She's really pioneered all sorts of ways to tackle this problem. She and many others have talked about how the pandemic made everyone slow down, buy less, travel less, do less, and perhaps meditate more, become a little more reflective about what matters. So that's the silver lining, I suppose. That's COVID's silver lining. We're all looking for one, right?
Well, yeah, you can't help but think somewhere like the break that it gave us, and that you discovered, like, wow, I can work from home. I can actually do those things from home. Was the absolute glass is half full about the whole situation, the whole scenario. But it also made you realize, like you're talking about, like 15, 16 other things that happened. Like I got outside more, I got to see my kids more, like it or not. Right. Especially with homeschooling, right? Yeah, which is difficult to imagine right now. Okay, so I'm gonna ask you some quickies about yourself that you're gonna have to answer kind of rapidly. You don't have to, but that you can answer.
I can dodge a few. Okay.
So you gave us the accent bit, that you got it from the South somewhere, an accumulation of people that you knew during your childhood in the South.
That's correct. Yeah.
I've had more than one person ask me that, by the way. and then somebody gave me this to ask you, and I don't know why. Cuba.
I understand why.
Well, I hope so.
I do understand why. That's not everyone's first choice of a vacation destination. It was for me for a very long time. I was lucky to travel with girlfriends who had the same globetrotting zeal that I did for many, many years. There was never any shuffling of the, I have to think about vacation or X value. No, it was travel first. So Cuba was the easiest choice we made because it was something for everyone. It was the Caribbean for one girlfriend. It was the history of the mafia for another girlfriend. And for me, it was the history of Hollywood. In fact, we made sure to stay at the National Hotel in Havana, where Hollywood frequented during its heyday, and we got to sleep in the bridal suite of Ava Gardner and Frank Sinatra.
You're kidding.
I am not kidding. And whoever slept in whatever room was, memorialized with a black and white photograph outside the door. And the Hollywood memorabilia at this hotel is incredible. It's just incredible. Cuba's
highly recommended, huh?
I can't recommend it enough. I'm also a huge Cuban jazz enthusiast, particularly Arturo Sandoval. I could listen to him really nonstop. So I don't know. I thought it was enchanting, also very distressing in many ways. It's not, it's not Club Med. You're going to see extreme poverty. But in some ways, that's thrilling. We visited the Communist Museum, the museum, the glories of communism. Yeah, it's fascinating.
That's so alien to us. To us, it's the worst word you could possibly call somebody else.
Well, right. But interestingly, that's the sort of the official government version of Cuban history. The Cuban people are channeling something else entirely. They're all very welcoming of Americans. Some of the most prosperous times in Cuba were when Americans were vacationing there in droves.
Yeah.
And if you're skeptical of that, you just need to look out at the cars that are still being driven.
Yeah, I heard.
Yeah, they're fantastic. They're still, buffed within an inch of their life, but the inside is all jerry-rigged with Russian parts.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so it's really quite something. We had a cab driver take us to the Tropicana one night, and he had rigged a small hand fan onto the dash of his, and it was whirring away, getting the job done. And I said, how did you come to own this whatever it was, 57 Chevy? Let's imagine that it's something like that. And he said, it was my father's, and it might have been his grandfather's. This is how we have made a living for 3 generations. Wow. So it's cool. It's really cool. Yeah.
So another thing, headscarves.
That's so funny that's piqued anyone's interest. So for me, I'm absolutely fearless when it comes to fashion. I'm completely fearless. I look back over photos of my life and go, that is such a horrible fashion faux pas. I'm speechless. Yeah, but I'm so glad that I tried it. I'm so glad I had silver lipstick on. We were always mixing tulle tutus, tutus with bomber jackets. You're old enough to remember that, I'm sure.
Well, my daughter's doing it now.
Well, right. That's that. Yeah, it all comes back around. And if you're old enough and you bought wisely, the back of your closet is like going to the best vintage store in the country. I saw in the Dior spring summer fashion show, and I adore headscarves. I adore them. And so I would challenge myself to try to, style them and make them of the moment in my caption. Because Instagram isn't just visual. Remember, you need a caption. And so I talked about the rightness of the headscarf because it invokes memories of all the street protests of the 70s and 60s. And so I did quite a bit of research into the foulard.
Well, they could be messaged as well.
If you need to be redundant, as if they aren't message enough, you can affix another with.
Go ahead and say something up there.
Of course. Of
Make it
course,
the same.
like, don't. Well, I was gonna try to invert maggot, but
Well,
um,
I asked my daughter one time if we could write anything on your headscarf, what would you write? And she said, "Don't look at me." So I had to think about that for a while.
wow,
Yeah, that's what I said.
isn't that is just brilliant? But it's also to me a little a little poignant. I mean, that's somebody who has absorbed the first surveillance state or surveillance.
Yeah.
Where they're just used to being someone's taking a picture, or I'm somehow obligated to turn this into a
And,
photograph.
and also somebody who might have been being looked at a lot and annoyed by the whole scenario.
Oh, well, there's that dynamic too.
Yeah.
As old as time. Yes.
Okay, one last one. Favorite retailer, or who do you think is the best retailer right now
Mm.
out there? Not
Well,
not profit wise or anything like that. Just
I'm not sure I can answer that. I'm not sure I can answer that because I'm so out of touch with stores, if you will, the store experience. If you extend that to online retailers, I
sure.
can tell you the ones that I have spent months studying. One of which is the Real Real. Maybe
Yeah.
we can end there since it ties it all these various motifs up rather well. You sent a funny question. You said the Real Real versus Salvation Army. Really, Nita? Well, not really. They're both good. They're both good for vintage shopping. Vintage shopping, of course, has also been impacted by COVID. I mean, of course
Yeah.
it has.
Yeah.
uh, yes, it's hard to go and fumble through bins of clothes or racks of clothes with the fears that we have currently.
I
But the
was very
difference,
impressed by Real Real. I'm very impressed by them.
it's a sharp operation.
Yeah.
Since 2011, she started with a U-Haul.
There you go.
Yeah, dropping off clothes. She's since grown it into a incredible market. I was going to give you some IPO info, but I don't have it on the tip of my tongue. But I admire them because it's all authenticated luxury merchandise. And that really is a concern. I remember when I wrote a book on subscription, I wrote a paper on, back in my resource IBM days, I wrote a paper on subscription commerce, and I looked into, the black market goods and counterfeit luxury goods. And so they've made every effort to make sure they're not purveyors of fake, Bottega Veneta, for instance. And so, if you are flying at that altitude, or you're an aspiring designer, you're an aspiring fashionista who admires a designer who's cost prohibitive, but you can find a way in through consignment or resale, you want to make sure it's actually Stella McCartney, don't you?
Yeah.
So not only that, but it has changed the whole nature, the whole value proposition of luxury, which is why they're partnering with Neiman Marcus in a very interesting way. And Lord knows Neiman Marcus needs all the help they can get right now. And that is to buy with an eye towards what will sell once you tire of it. And so I admire the circular economy logic
Yeah.
of that, obviously.
Yeah. Talking
And
about sustainability, I think
right.
that's reuse is the first R, right? Or a second R, maybe. Reduce is the first R.
Use, reuse, and
Cycle.
reimagine. I forget. Recycle. Right. So there's really not that much not to like about consignment. I think they were perceived as an enemy of wholesale, of luxury, and why not? I mean, but I don't think that they necessarily are. I think that there are all sorts of mutual benefits that can be hatched and synergies that can be constructed and exploited.
So why don't you close us out and tell us, like, what if there's anything else that we didn't talk about that's kind of bugging you? Is there anything out there that you want to get off your chest? Like, what is it out there that's
Oh gosh,
giving you some drive?
yeah. Oh, giving me drive.
Yeah, like it's bothering you. You gotta get.
Well, I
something.
mean, there's no shortage of things to be absolutely anxiety-ridden about. I worry about the sixth extinction. I worry about species extinction. I worry about fire, drought, climate refugees. I worry about other things too, though. And this is an area that you probably won't see coming from me. unless you were with me during the last couple of years at IBM. And I got really close to, the big data action at IBM, or at least I felt a great obligation to learn as much as I could, as quickly as I could about it. And we worked with Watson. We worked with Watson Marketing. We worked with the various APIs, application programming interfaces that comprise Watson. And, to the extent that a cultural semiotician or a futurist, or a marketer can get under the hood, we had a few moments where we felt as if we were getting very close to how it was all assembled and the value that it created and the threats that it posed. Of course, threats were minimized. Obviously, it's IBM. But I have since leaving thought quite a bit about big data, data privacy issues, artificial intelligence, and the role that humanities needs to continue to play in this space, in marketing and technology. I'm not the only one that's worried about this, but I now have firsthand experience of how difficult it is to wed those two worlds, Lee, to insist upon the importance of humanities and insights into human nature when you're trying to marry them with algorithms.
Did you see the movie Ex Machina?
Of course. Fascinating.
I could watch it 5 times. Maybe I have watched it 5 times. But the idea that he wasn't really, everybody thought I was trying to, that's my quote from the movie, everybody thought I was trying to gather data about how people bought stuff. But I wanted to gather data about how they think so I could create this artificial brain.
Right.
The exact duplicate of the human brain.
Right.
And I thought, oh my gosh, it's about this far from reality.
Yes, it's a revolution. I'm not a Luddite, not by any means. I understand that there is enormous value to science and medicine that comes from big data. But I also know that the more beholden we come to data, the more we believe that data itself is truth, the more trouble we're in. Data, when I was working with data scientists on the last big platform we developed, which was brand belonging, I quickly realized that the extremely agile, gifted data scientists can make the data say just about anything you want the data to say.
Well, that's long been a truism. Right?
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. But now just take that and multiply it by 2 billion, and you have some sense of, yes, the unconscious biases that go into data sciences, et cetera. So it's something that I read about just from time to time when I want to get into a very dark and gloomy space. I'm kidding. Well, I think being more informed about data means you're giving less away in all likelihood.
That's so true.
Yes.
At the end of the day, that is so true.
So I geeked out a little bit at the end, but I think if you work for a major technology company, you wrestle with these things.
I bet.
Yeah.
I bet. Yeah, there's a certain amount of inhumanity, I think, in just about all of it, to a degree. The fact that a long time ago, you would search for gloves. Then you go on the Weather Channel, and all these gloves appear on the side of it, it's an old, the cookies thing and all that stuff that's 20 years old. But when that first started happening, you started thinking, what? I'm doing this over here and doing this, which, as a digital immigrant, again, I could go shopping for gloves before. Nobody knew I was shopping for gloves. Then 15 people weren't trying to sell me gloves from all different places all over the world.
That's right.
And then
you know who bought the Weather Channel, don't you, Lee?
Yeah, IBM.
Yes, that's a spicy little anecdote we'll save for another podcast. Yes.
They need to fix their website. Their website just kind of doesn't work. It doesn't work because it's got so many.
I haven't visited in a while.
Me neither. I have the app on my phone. It works perfectly. But if you go to the website,
yes,
it doesn't work. You want to see the radar, let's say.
Right.
You got to wait 5 minutes for that radar to load up.
Oh, gosh.
Because there's 16 ads have to come in before the radar does.
Yes. Well, right. Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I caught on to that once I saw IBM, and I was like, you would think IBM, you'd make this thing run like magic. But
Oh, well, of course they could. I think the primary reason for acquiring the Weather Channel was for all of that beautiful data about your son out there
mm,
composting and growing his own food. When he
mm,
checks to get the weather for Southern Ohio, this is no longer the case. So for the record, this is no longer the case. But all that data is then repackaged and sent to people who might want to sell your son a new garden hoe, or in your case, a pair of gloves. Yes.
okay, I'm gonna close this out, and thank you very much. You've been very gracious. It was really great to have a conversation with you. I'm pretty sure we can get together and keep this going for a pretty long time until we solve every problem on Earth.
Yes.
I think that would definitely happen.
With a few drinks, perhaps.
Okay, so thank you for making the podcast a lot better, and hopefully we can have another chat a little bit down the road and see where we go here in this next year. It's going to be very, very interesting. Okay, and so people be sure and listen to WDcast for more valuable and extremely interesting people like Nita and Dr. Nita, I should say. And also be sure to subscribe to this podcast, which is on WDpartners.com. Just go to the hamburger, click on the hamburger, and you'll see a little icon for a podcast. Click on there and please subscribe and join us in this venture. And so thank you for listening. Be safe and make sure you listen to the scientists and not the politicians. And we will talk to you next time. Thank you.
Georgia. Rock and roll can never ever hip hop like